Hi, Nathan here from PH Studios, and welcome to another C# video. In this video, I'm just going to quickly discuss the different pass-by types: pass-by reference and pass-by value. So one of the confusing things about C# is, and most languages like Java, are how does it work on pass-by, especially when I'm dealing with classes. And if you're first starting with the language, and that can be a little bit confusing. So I just wanted to, somebody asked me to do this video, and I just wanted to do a brief overview on that. So I got everything set up here. I created a class called person that just has a name and a constructor, and it made an override to the toString that just returns the name. And I created a struct called circle with the integer radius, the constructor, and a toString override that just returns the radius as a string. Okay, so let's talk about pass-by value first. That's the first example here. So when we pass by value, when we're talking about a object here, when we're passing by value, let's look at the first line here. Person A is equal to new person with the name of Nathan. Person A is a reference to this person object. It is not the object itself. It is a reference to the Nathan person. Now, when we call change person, we're not passing the object, we're passing the reference. Remember, person A is not the object itself, it's just the reference. So we're passing the reference to the change person method. And we're passing that by value. So what does that mean? We're passing the reference. Think of the reference as an integer, like say 20. So person A points to the memory location, is a reference to the memory location of 20. That's what person A is. It's 20. Memory location 20. So when we call change person, we are passing the memory location 20. But it's as a value. So when we go into change person, we have person P. Now person P does not equal the same object in the main method. Remember, we're passing the reference. So for example, it's memory location 20. When we get into this method here, we get that memory location 20, and we have a new reference to the same person. So we have two references to the Nathan person. The two references are not related to each other. And you'll see that in the second line here. So, person P. Now, when we call P.name is equal to will, that will change the object's name to will. Remember, we have two references to the same person object. So we're changing the object's name to will. That will change even the first reference. When we call that reference's .name, it'll be will. So person A in main now becomes a name of will since it is the property of the object. So when we call properties, fields, methods of a object, it'll change that for all references. Now, when I told you a minute or two ago that the two references are not related, you will see that in this line here. Here we create a brand new person with the name of Rob, and we're storing the reference of that in P. Person A still points to the will object, but P now points to the new Rob object. So now we have two objects, and the two pointers point to the different objects. So that is what pass-by value is when we're talking about classes, objects. It passes the value, it passes the reference of that object as the value. So it passes the memory location, the reference, as a value. So we create a second pointer to the same object. Okay. So now when we're dealing with like integers, floats, booleans, it'll pass the value of that. So integer 10, it'll pass 10 to the method. So that way if we change integer, it won't affect the original value. So just to demonstrate that, I created another block of code for integers. So we have an int x is equal to 1. And then we call the setX method and we pass x as value. So when we call the setX, we change x to 3, but x in main is still 1. So when we call console.writeLine x, it is 1 because we're passing it as value and we're not doing anything. It's not manipulating this x. Alright, so let's talk about pass by reference. And this is using the class, the object as an example again. So person A is equal to new person Nathan. So we are making another person object called Nathan, and we were storing the reference to that in person A. Now when we call change person reference person A, it is passing the reference of the person as a reference. So this method, it accepts a ref parameter. Now I'm not going to spend 50 minutes and discuss like memory and how that works and how things are working in the background. But the ref keyword, any change to the parameter will be reflected in the calling method. So any change we make to person A will be reflected, any change we make to the reference of person A and the change person method will be reflected by the person A object here. So if we go into the reference, the change person reference method, and we call p.name is equal to Will. So person A in main now has the name of Will. That is the exact same thing we had in the other method. Now, P is equal to new person Rob. Now, person A in main is now the Rob object, because any change we make to the parameter here will be reflected into the object that was used to call the method. So the person A in main now has the Rob object. So that's what we pass by reference. When you want to make any change reflect on the caller, you want to use reference. So to recap, to pass by value of a object, we are passing the reference as the value. So we are creating a separate reference, but they point to the same object. Now in this one, we are passing by reference. So we are passing the reference of person A to the method. So any change we make when it's a parameter, any change we make to person P will be reflected in the caller. So this is passing the reference of person A instead of the reference to person. So the person Nathan has a location in memory, and person A has a reference to that location. Person A has a location in memory that stores that reference. So whatever memory location person A has inside of it, let's say it has memory location 20. And then memory location 20 has all the, integers, floats, anything that makes up the person in memory location 20 and so on. So we are referencing here person A, not the person object, as we are in this one. So it's a little bit confusing at first, but think about it this way. If all you want to do is change properties, so you want to change properties, fields, and call methods, which will change, internally it'll change the properties and fields, you'll want to use pass by value here. If you want to change the initial reference, so if we want to change person A to something else and do some more logic, you want to use the reference parameter. Because if we change the parameter in this method here, it will be changed in this main method here. It'll be changed in the caller. Now, same thing with the circles. It's pretty much the exact same thing. In this one, we are passing it by value. However, circle is a struct. Struct is a value type. Class is a reference type. So struct is a value type. So when we pass the structure of circle to change circle, not as a reference, as a value, it essentially creates a copy of the circle structure. So they both have different, they're not pointed to the same object because structure is not an object. It's creating a copy of that structure. So in this method, when we call c.radius, it'll only be changed in the circle C. The circle A in main still remains 10 because they are structures. It is a value type. Just like with the integer, integer is a value type. So when we change x in here, x in main is still 1. Now, when we're passing by reference, as the structure as reference, C is a reference to the circle A from main. So when we call c.radius is equal to 5, circle A in main is 5. So now when we call C is equal to new circle 20, circle A in main is now a new circle structure with the radius of 20. So references work the same with structures as you would expect from objects, classes. Any manipulation will be changed, will be reflected in the caller. So whenever you want that, you will want to use ref. No matter what the change is, if you want it to be reflected in the caller, you'll want to use ref. Even if you make a new object, if you want that new object to be changed in the caller function, you want to use the ref keyword. If you just want to change the properties, fields, or calling the methods that will internally change the properties, fields, and whatever, change the object state or to whatever, you'll just want to use pass by value. Okay, so is this confusing yet? I know when I was first learning programming, I was confused, especially with, C++, it's a lot more difficult to program this because you have pointers and you need a reference and then dereference the stuff. But you are more familiar with how it works when you're working with C++. It might be a pain in the butt to program with C++ and manually do all the memory management and all that stuff. But once you learn that, you'll understand what's going on. With Java and C# and other little languages like that, it's a little bit more confusing to know what pass by value and reference is. Even by default, you pass an object to a method, it is passed by value, and that confuses a lot of people because it's passing the reference as the value. And once you talk to them that it's actually passing your reference as a value, they get confused because it has both those keywords in the sentence. So think about it like this. By default, it is passed by value. When you pass an object, it is creating a second reference to the same object, because you're passing the reference to the object. When you want any change to be reflected in the caller, you want to use the ref keyword. Any change, doesn't matter if if you make a new object, if you just change the fields, properties, and call the methods, any change will be reflected in the caller if you use the ref keyword. Okay, so now let's discuss out. Out is pretty much half of reference. Reference is two-way communication. So the communication is, when you are using a ref, it gives you both in and out communication. When you're using out, it gives you only out communication. So I paused the video and I created a out for a person so I can demonstrate something. So when I talk about communication, two-way communication, both in and out, we're using the ref keyword. When we are only worrying about out communication, we use the out keyword. So, what is the difference? What is an in communication and what is an out communication? Well, if we look at the change person here with the out keyword, and I just want to change the name, person A is equal to name, it gives us an error saying it's use of unsigned out parameter person A. So out requires that the parameter has to be assigned before it leaves the method. So in this case, person A hasn't been assigned yet, so we cannot call .name. Similarly, you have to assign when you have an out parameter before you leave the method. So that is what it's meant by one-way communication. You saw person A was not assigned, so I cannot call .name. But it changes, it's a reference, so when I assign it, the original becomes the new value. You just have to assign it. You have to assign it. Okay, so let's look at out for an integer. So we have an integer called x, and we assign it 1, and then we call set x out x. So let's look at that. Now, you might perform other logic here, and you might not set x at all. But, like I said, you have to assign it before it leaves the method. That's one of the requirements for using out. So you have to assign it. If it's an object, you have to call new object to assign it. If it's a Boolean, integer, whatever, you can just call x is equal to whatever it is, and that will assign it. But it has to be assigned, so when you use out, keep that in mind, that you have to assign it somewhere in the method for it to work. And it will change the original x. So x in main is now 4, because it's essentially a reference with half the capabilities. It's only an out communication, that's why the keyword is out. Okay, so I hope I explained everything as best as I could. I hope it was useful. I didn't go into memory diagrams and all that stuff. If you are still confused, I'm sure you can find some online and they'll give you a nice picture of what's going on and the internal on what's going on in the memory. But I just wanted to give you a brief overview on what pass by reference and pass by value means in the code and all that stuff. So this is a pretty confusing topic. I had a couple days in school devoted to just this, and we went into memory diagrams and all that stuff, and it took a couple of hours because we really got in deep, and I don't want to take your time with a couple of hours. So I just discussed things in a general overview, and hopefully I did a good job at it. So, keep in mind, by default, everything is passed by value, even when you pass objects. When you pass objects, you are passing the reference to the object as the value. So it essentially creates two references to the same object. So if you change one of the references, it will not change the other reference. That is passed by value. Structures are value types. Classes are reference types. So when you pass a structure, remember it's a value type, so when you pass that as value, it essentially creates a copy. So any change you make to the circle here will not be reflected in the caller, because that's a different structure. When you're talking about classes, when you pass by value, any change you make to the internal of the class, like the properties, fields, you call any methods, that will be reflected in the caller when you pass it by value. So the internal of an object will be reflected in the caller when you pass it by value, because these are reference types. Now, when you use the ref keyword, that means that any change you make to that object, even if you make a new object, and it doesn't have to be an object, it can be a struct as well. Any change you make a new person, that will be reflected in the caller. So when you want that result, you want to use the ref keyword. Any change, you can just change the name, and that will be reflected in the caller, just like if you pass by value. But if you make a new person object, and you use the ref keyword, that will be changed in the caller, and you have a new person object. So pass by value is when you want to change the internals of a class. When you're talking about a reference type, if you're talking about a value type, when you pass by value, it creates a copy, and any change you make to that copy will not be reflected in the caller. When you pass by value, both those things kind of become equal. You pass a structure as a reference, it kind of acts like a reference type because you're passing it as a reference. So if you change the radius, it changes the radius in the caller. If you make a new circle, it'll change that in the caller as well. Out gives you half the functionality of reference. Think of it that way. Reference gives you two-way communication, in and out. You pass the reference and it has an in communication. You can immediately set its parameters and its fields right after you call the method, inside the method. With using out, you have to assign the parameter before you can use it. And you have to assign the parameter before you exit the method. If you do not, it'll give you a warning. So out gives you half the functionality because it's not assigned initially. It's not in communication, it's out communication. Okay, so if you need a part 2 where I go into memory diagrams, just let me know. I hope I did everything I could in the code side. So if you need me to make a part 2 of this video, and create some memory diagrams and all that stuff, just let me know. And I'll do that for you guys. Alright, so that was C# pass by. And we have two other C# planned. One of them is debugging, and the other one is object-oriented programming concepts. So I hope you enjoyed this video, and I hope I helped some of you with your confusion on what is pass by value and pass by reference. And I'll give you this program file so you can see it. So I hope to see you next time, and thanks for watching.